So welcome, everybody, to this Garden Court seminar, Orgreave, A Long Road to Truth, Justice and Accountability. It's a hybrid webinar. We've got welcoming you who have attended in person, but we also have attendees online and or speakers. We have a number of our speakers are also online. So what will we be hoping to cover today? The government's announcement of a public inquiry into the events at Orgreave in 1984 and its aftermath has been described as both historic and momentous. In this seminar, our speakers will explore the events that took place at Orgreave, examining the enduring impact on those involved, and reflecting on the campaign for justice that has spanned over 4 decades. By way of introduction, I'm Thalia Maragh, a member of the Garden Court Civil Liberties team, and my areas of practice are crime and civil liberties, particularly public inquiries and inquests, in which I act for bereaved families in inquests and often victims who are core participants in public inquiries. And my work has included Hillsborough, representing the victims of Grenfell, and the ongoing COVID inquiry. Marguerite Russell, who is one of our speakers, is a barrister at Garden Court Chambers, and she was one of the defense barristers in the Orgreave trial. She has an extensive number of years of experience, and her expertise includes evidence in DNA, cell site, firearms, computer evidence, handwriting, psychiatric evaluations, just to name a few. And Margaret has acted as leading counsel in a number of significant high-profile trials, and today she will share with us her first-hand experience in the Orgreave trials. And so we are really, really fortunate to have Margaret's experience and expertise with us. Pete Weatherby, King's Counsel, is a barrister at Garden Court North Chambers, and Pete is based in Manchester. He's online and was a student at the time of the strikes. Through the student union, Pete and others organized transport to picket lines and food deliveries to remote mining communities who had very limited resources. Pete has led teams representing families and survivors at many controversial inquests and inquiries, including Hillsborough, Grenfell, COVID, Undercover Police Inquiry, Manchester Arena, Anthony Granger, and ongoing inquiry into Southport. And he was on the panel of the UEFA 2022 Champions League final international review that has led the team assisting the government in enacting Hillsborough, and has had the team assisting the government enacting Hillsborough law. So the forthcoming Orgreave inquiry may well be an early test of the new provisions, and if used properly, will significantly aid the search for truth and justice. And Pete is going to share some insight into that. Chris Peace, who is also online, and we're very lucky to have her, is a member of the Truth, Justice Orgreave campaign. And Chris has worked as a teacher, trade union organizer, and is an elected councillor. She currently works as a criminal defense solicitor and has over 20 years experience in this role. She was brought up in a rural mining community. Chris is an activist who plays an essential role in the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, ensuring the campaign maintains its effective strategy and national profile. And also from the campaign, we have Kate Flannery, and she's the secretary of the campaign. And her work has included many years of experience in policy and practice in local government, the voluntary sector and trade union movement, initiating and organizing many political, historic, art, and public awareness campaigns and events. And Kate was an active trade unionist and member of the Women Against Pit Closures through the 84-85 Maragh strike. And again, we're really fortunate to have Kate joining us and sharing her experience with us. And with me here in the room is Paul Heron. He's a solicitor at Public Law Interest Center. And his main practice areas are public law and public inquiries. And he currently represents several of the core participants in the public law undercover police inquiry, including former Labour MP, Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and Stop the War Coalition. And Paul also represented the Independent Workers' Union for Great Britain and United Voices of the World Trade Unions, organizing cleaners, porters, and carers in the NHS in the public inquiry. And as a teenager, so we're going some way back, Paul, he was active in the Labour Party, Young Socialists, and supported miners during the 84 to 85 strike, frequently visiting the Bowl Colliery in Merseyside in solidarity. So in terms of our speakers, we have Pete joining back in his university days on the line, and also Paul. So a real wealth and depth of experience. So I welcome you all online in the room and to our speakers. I want to start off by taking us back to the experiences back in '84. And we're going to show a clip from the Channel 4 footage of Orgreave. And the clip will feature Margaret's client, Ernie Barber, who was one of the miners and who was prosecuted wrongly and through the defense team exonerated. So it's just about a minute or less. And then we will move into Margaret's talk on the trials and missed opportunities in righting those wrongs and injustice in the immediate aftermath.
We was a little bit later than most. It must have been 11, probably. Sets off, marched down that road. Got to the bridge. Whee, what's happening here? Miners running up the hill with police behind them. And I thought, and somebody said, and I don't know to this day who he was, but he said, "Don't run, lad, you've done no wrong." And I turned to see how it worked and smack. That's when I got cracked across the face. There's a policeman, one on each arm, holding my arm, and one behind me battering me. The policeman that arrested me, he knelt down to my feet, started giving it like this. And I could see his eyes bulging through this dark visor. Bloody hell, he's lost it. And then the inspector comes, stood behind him, and I looked up, and this inspector said, "Pack it in, you'll kill him." So they just stopped, put my hands behind my back, and he marched me down this hill.
How long have you been at Orgreave?
Orgreave, like, no more than 20 minutes, half an hour, if that.
Thank you. We'll start off with Margaret, leading off with the discussions, taking us back to the trials and missed opportunities to right the wrong in the immediate aftermath.
It's a sort of dubious pleasure to hear Ernie, with whom I've remained friendly over all these years, speak about his experience, because what a lot of people don't realize in something like the miners' trials or many demonstration trials, people who have never had contact with the police are caught up in the nightmare of arrest, court procedures, and so on, with which they have no experience whatsoever. And the real fear that both Ernie and his wife, who I've been friendly with ever since the trial, had was a Home Secretary who was, and a government that was saying these people should get life imprisonment. And they believed it. They believed that that was something they were facing. And Ernie described the barristers, the group of us, when he first met us. We were not what he was expecting. He was expecting, I think, people in three-piece suits, very serious. And of course, we all turned up on a Saturday in jeans and sweatshirts and so on. And the wonderful thing about the Orgreave trial, from my point of view, was understanding the complete solidarity of the miners with each other. And that solidarity covered through, because what people don't realize, there were another, I think, 97 people awaiting trial on Orgreave. And when everyone was acquitted on that first trial, they were basically brought together again, the remainder of people awaiting trial for Orgreave, and they were basically offered a bind over. And 99% of them did not want to take a bind over because they felt they'd done nothing wrong, and they hadn't done anything wrong. But the amazing solidarity was, because there was no evidence against most of them individually, but there was one miner, unfortunately, who could be seen on the films that the police had kicking at a police horse. And those remaining miners, even though it meant that they would give up their civil actions and so on, those remaining miners all chose to stand with that man and accept a bind over rather than allow a trial to take place in which he could have been convicted. And for me, seeing that kind of solidarity, that effort amongst ordinary people to work together against injustice was an incredible lesson, an incredible thing to experience. The trial itself, I can only say that from, and quoting Ernie on this, when they turned up to meet their barristers for the first time, and of course we turned up in jeans and, you know, we were the lefty bar kind of thing. And he said, he looked at us and decided that the group of us must be completely mad and that would probably be a good thing in a trial like this. And sure enough, he was right, because the prosecution mishandled the trial in a way that is inconceivable unless you understand the complete arrogance of the bar in those years, where the huge percentage were public school boys who'd never met ordinary people most of their lives except in shops. And the prosecutor sort of tried to mimic the miners who came from all over the north of England and Wales, with the phrase, here we go, here we go. And it became a standing joke in the trial to mimic the prosecutor on this. And the other thing that the prosecutor did was to ask every police officer, do you have a relative who is a miner? And you would be amazed at how many of the police, apparently, who were there to prosecute the miners had relatives who were cousins or uncles or whatever in the mining industry. But the trial, which from the defendant's point of view started out as a very frightening experience where a Home Secretary had stated publicly that they should get life sentences, ended up in what I can only describe from the months that it took into a never-ending party. And it's difficult to explain that, except to say that the police evidence was so contrived, so dishonest, so completely at variance with the actual evidence that was mainly shown on camera, that from the defense point of view, it was an absolute dream. And that dream started off with the chief constable, Clements, standing in front of police video, which gave the time of when various things happened, and giving his own statement, which gave different times from the police evidence. I mean, it was the most extraordinary thing. He stood there and said, you know, something like, at age 41, so and so happened, and you'd be looking at a screen that said it was 8:13, and you know, and it was very it's very difficult to convey just how far off it was. And the end result of that trial, as everybody knows, is not only were the 15 people there accused all acquitted, but I think something like 78 people also arrested at Orgreave had basically no evidence offered against them. There were no further trials because of what the drubbing that they got. And the reason why the trial went so badly was because of the fundamental dishonesty of the police. What they did was they took, when somebody was arrested, like Ernie, who was hit on the head and had blood streaming down his chest, they took him into a room where they cleaned him up before they photographed him. And if it hadn't been for the amazing collection of photographs that Gareth Pearce, the solicitor, got together, there would have been no evidence of the number of injuries that were caused to the miners by being hit by truncheons and so on. But I think the real horror of it really is difficult to describe for the miners who experienced it. The trial was an absolute joy because day after day after day, the police were caught out in lying, literally lying, to such an extent that Vera Baird had 2 officers against one of her clients. And after cross-examining the first officer, the second officer didn't turn up at court and sent a sick note in saying that when he went past Orgreave, he was feeling unwell and couldn't go. I mean, it was every defense barrister's sort of fantasy dream world of what could happen. But what's really important, and I hope that this helps in this. Afterwards, I got in touch with an MP I knew called Jo Richardson, who was an MP in the East End of London, who was a brilliant socialist and a lovely woman. And I got in touch with her and I said, look, people ought to understand the police corruption that underlay this, that created the circumstances in which people were acquitted, and they offered no evidence in any further trials at Orgreave. And she helped arrange a exhibition at the House of Commons, which showed, forged statements, photographs that contradicted the statements, and and we'd put evidence up around. Only 2 MPs turned up, despite the fact that Jo had publicised it, despite the fact that there were a lot of Labour MPs who apparently stood with the miners. Nobody could be bothered. Nobody took any notice. Why is that so important? Because the same officers who were in charge at Orgreave were the officers who were in charge at Hillsborough. And had their corruption been exposed, as we tried to do in Orgreave, Hillsborough may never have happened. And that to me is one of the real, what seems like a tremendous victory at the Orgreave trial. The real tragedy is that should have played into Hillsborough. Those senior officers should never have been allowed to continue in charge of anything. And as I say, Orgreave was tremendous. I learned about the amazing courage and solidarity of miners from all over the country. And it was, well, as Ernie would describe it, he said, they turned up, they were really frightened, and it ended up as a never-ending party. And that was true. And I've remained friendly with Ernie ever since, and his wife, and we've spent time together in London and in the Midlands. But the tragedy of that trial is, had that success been analysed properly by the authorities, Hillsborough may never have happened. And unfortunately, Hillsborough happened because there wasn't a proper examination. And I think those of us who represent people in these kind of show trials must always bear in mind that unless you expose the wrongdoing and get as much publicity for it as possible, it just repeats itself. And that's really what happened at Hillsborough. You have the same team making mistakes, covering them up, lying. And it's a tragedy for people, a tragedy that shouldn't have happened. So Orgreave was one of, well, probably the most fun trial experience I've ever had. We partied for months during it. And everyone was acquitted, and all the people in the main trial got damages because they were on trial. Everybody else, and again, the miners' solidarity was extraordinary. There were a load of miners, I can't remember the exact number, awaiting trials, and the prosecution offered bindovers, and 99.9, etc., did not want to accept bindovers because they felt they'd done nothing wrong and people had been acquitted in trial one, etc. But in what would have been the second trial, there was one piece of evidence against one miner that was irrefutable that he'd done something wrong, because he'd run up towards the police officer on a horse and kicked at him. And all those colleagues of his, all those other miners in that trial, took bindovers rather than risk him being convicted. They didn't have to take the bindovers. They could have. They would have won. But he was at real risk. None of the others were because of the first trial. But they all stood together and took the bindovers to avoid another trial. So Orgreave. The lesson of Orgreave is you must hold senior officers to accountability when something like that happens, and have an inquiry as to why so many people were acquitted. And if that had happened, those senior officers would never have been in a position to act at Hillsborough. So those are my thoughts. The real heroes of the Orgreave trial are the miners themselves, and a very incompetent prosecution to a certain extent as well, in not realizing that Sheffield was a mining town and that the sympathies were always going to be with the miners. But anyway, it was an honor to be in the trial. It's been a wonderful thing to be friends with Ernie ever since. And certainly I would hope that any inquiry into Hillsborough makes that link with proper inquiry, makes that link with those same officers. It is difficult to describe how barefaced they were, that the senior officer, Clements, could stand in front of a video film that had the times on it, and because it suited his account, give completely different times of when things were occurring. That was the arrogance of the police, and it really was stunning. And so all I can say to everybody, Orgreave, to be in the Orgreave trial was one of the great privileges of my entire career, if not the one. I've made permanent friendship with Ernie, one of my clients, out of it. And all I can say is never underestimate, firstly, how officers from all over the country in different ways can lie. And that provided moments of comic relief in the trial, because all criminal lawyers know about police verbals, saying defendants have said things that they haven't. And because the officers came from different parts of the country, unfortunately, when they verbaled, for example, Welsh miners, Yorkshire officers verbaled them in broad Yorkshire with Yorkshire expressions. And it really was very funny on one level, but not funny for the people who'd been awaiting that trial.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Margaret. And
so I hope that covers it.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your reflections, because that segues really well into Pete's observations and thoughts and discussion on the link between Orgreave and Hillsborough, as one of the lawyers who has campaigned with the families, the Hillsborough families, for decades, represented a number of families in the inquests, and has also been leading on the work to get a legislation on the duty of candor to be passed, and we know it as Hillsborough law. So Pete, I'm going to ask you to come in now and give us some of your thoughts on the link and
Thanks,
where.
Thalia, and I'm really pleased to be speaking at this event, and humbled to be following Marguerite, who was very much one of my mentors when I was a young barrister, and she's perhaps not expressed the extent to which the lawyers involved in the Orgreave trial played such a big part in unpicking the power, the apparently boundless power of the police at the time, which was certainly to a significant extent down to people like Marguerite to pull apart. As you mentioned at the start, Thalia, I do have a personal connection with the miners' strike, because it really was a great eye opener to me. And you mentioned that before I was a lawyer, I was driving miners to picket lines because I had a driving license, and the student union had 15-seater vans, and a lot of miners were moving around picketing out pits which hadn't come out on strike yet. And we also took food, because the student union wasn't allowed to give money to the miners' campaign, but it was allowed to go to Costco twice a week and fill up a 15-seater van with food and then drop it off at remote miners' pit and community centres, and collectively going to lots of different pits, lots of different picket lines. I think I got quite a big picture of what was going on, where the government were not only emboldening and using the police as their private army, and trying to destroy trade unionism by going for the miners during the strike, but also they were kind of starving them as well, because very many places that I ended up going to, because we were trying to spread the little amount of relief we could provide, was to remote areas. You could see that, viscerally see the real effect that it was having on working class mining communities. So that was very much a grounding for me. But that's really the background to Orgreave, was political policing. And then you also mentioned I've been involved in all sorts of other cases, iconic cases in many circumstances where there's been state corruption, not just the police, but in different ways and in completely different context. The Manchester Arena, a bombing outrage, Grenfell, the fire, Granger, a police shooting, different context, but the same old story, that the political power and official bodies are trying to protect themselves and project their power to the detriment of ordinary people, or people who've been affected and wronged, either by state wrongdoing or state failure to address other disasters. And so that has concentrated my mind and many other campaigners' minds, including the Orgreave campaign, into what we can try and do about it. So during the Hillsborough campaign, and then during the fresh inquests, which were in 2014-16, I was one of the barristers represented one of the two main teams, along with Mark George, in fact, who those of you involved in the campaign will know well. Sadly, he's no longer with us, but I co-piloted the team with Mark. We often discussed the connection between Hillsborough and Orgreave, and we brought it into the inquest and regularly raised it and sought disclosure about Orgreave for the reasons that Marguerite has already heard, that we were acutely aware that what happened at Hillsborough had been led up to by the same happening at Orgreave in terms of the cover-up and the way that the police tried to conduct the prosecutions there. And they very much used the methodology as a template for Hillsborough. And that's why we were so keen to raise it, and we did to some effect, I think. The comments I want to make, I'll make them quickly, are the fixing of the evidence of both Orgreave and then Hillsborough was systematic and systemic. It was the arrogance of power at the time. The police knew that there was poor disclosure at criminal processes and just about zero at inquests. And therefore, they thought they could get away with anything. And of course, they often did until people like Marguerite turned up and unpicked it in the trials. But in many other occasions, the police would get away with absolute outrage. And they certainly did at Hillsborough on the first time round. This wasn't canteen culture. It was top-down corruption. It was directed from the top. It wasn't just a couple of bent coppers in the canteen. So what we have by the time we get to Hillsborough, just 5 years down the line from all, is that immediately the police organisationally realised that they'd caused the disaster. And shockingly, before many of the 97 had even died, the police commanders were sending out teams looking for beer cans to see if they could start to evidence what would become their false narrative that the supporters had caused the disaster. They were drunk, late, ticketless, and had forced their way in, causing the crush. Now, none of that was true. None of it was true. And of course, 27 years later, the families were able to prove that during the fresh inquests. But on the day of the disaster itself in 1989, Peter Wright, the South Yorkshire Police commander, set up two teams the very day of the disaster. One of those teams is to put out the false narrative, and that included the drafting of a report purporting to put forward the account that I've just referred to, but also briefing the Sun and other media outlets with the outrageous lies that they then published about supporters stealing from the dead and urinating on police responders, none of which was true, of course, and sending senior officers to Parliament to brief friendly MPs to run their narrative on a political level. And a wholly separate team was set up with the evidence to suit that narrative. And the top-down corruption I was referring to earlier, which segued Orgreave into Hillsborough, started with police officers on the day being told not to complete their pocket notebooks. Why? So that later they would do statements on plain paper, which could be ripped up and completely changed. It's a lot more difficult to do that if you've got a contemporaneous note in a pocket notebook. And the level of corruption, I mean, it was illustrated in evidence at the Hillsborough inquests, where you had, for example, a young police officer on the pitch who wrote a truthful statement which showed, because she watched it as it happened, exactly what the consequence of the gross negligence of the police commanders was. A senior police officer stood over her. This was her evidence on oath, still a police officer 27 years later, where she said a police officer stood over and ripped up her statement and told her to rewrite it, writing out the police failures and giving a completely false account. She was forced to do that. Even if police officers wanted to tell the truth, which some of them did, many of them didn't, they weren't allowed to do so. And at the outset, the Taylor inquiry was to see through some of this, but very quickly the police regrouped, and with the help of the coroner, they managed to get their narrative confirmed, and the original inquests concluded that Hillsborough had just been an accident caused by the fans themselves, a terrible and enduring miscarriage of justice for 2.5 decades. What was to actually unravel the miscarriage of justice was the relentless campaigning of the families themselves. It led to the Hillsborough Independent Panel in 2010, and the key drivers that broke the Hillsborough story open at that point was firstly the personnel on the panel, Bishop James, then Bishop of Liverpool, but also with huge support from a whole panel, Raju Bhatt, a solicitor, Pat Murphy, played a very leading part, Professor Scraton, who wrote the book on Hillsborough, Dr. Kirkup, who was instrumental in looking at the medical evidence and how the original inquest had fitted that up. But secondly, the key feature of it was disclosure. For the first time, the disclosure was available. It hadn't been available to the families at the original inquest. So you started to see the disclosure of police statements, other witnesses, a whole host of official documents. It became clear that the police statements had been doctored, and then there was the footage. And so from the disclosure, it could then be readily seen that the police narrative was false, and it led to the fresh inquests and the verdicts of unlawful killing and the righting of much of the wrongs that had been done. But a lot of the, since the inquest, the families have continued and a whole host of campaigns behind them, very happily a whole host of campaigns behind them, but very sadly too, because they were behind the Hillsborough families, because they'd suffered the similar fate that I referred to at the start, with cover-ups and an obfuscation by the police and other public authorities. And they have, as a legacy project of Hillsborough, come up with Hillsborough law, which is a whole new approach, which requires by law candour with proper enforcement processes, which narrows the opportunity for cover-ups, and makes it a big risk for police officers and their managers and also other public servants to continue to tell lies or to obfuscate or to hide the truth, misleading not only victims and those affected by these things, but also the public, hiding their wrongdoing and their failures. So it requires, through what we hope are effective and practical legal tools, the proactive cooperation with investigations and inquiries and inquests and panels, including things like the use of position statements, requirements on authorities and officials to provide the evidence, the full evidence and disclosure at the start of the process. And it also rebalances the processes like Hillsborough with providing for public funding for representation so that there's an equality of arms and a rebalancing. And in negotiating Hillsborough law with the government, which I've spent much of the last year doing, and that's why I've lost a lot of hair, the government have been extremely mindful. We've been extremely mindful of the fact that these changes are needed now, and the new powers and duties that are included in Hillsborough law need to apply to the Orgreave inquiry itself. And we've said that repeatedly to ministers and officials when we've been in the room with them. And incidentally, one of the ministers, the victims minister, her father was actually a miner at Orgreave. So we hope that, although she's not fantastic on everything, we hope that that will play on her mind to push this through. So we're promised by the government that Hillsborough law will be enacted by April or May at the latest. And we anticipate that, although we hope the Orgreave inquiry will go quickly, but if it's still going on at that point, which I think it will be, then Hillsborough law will be applicable to it, and the tools that are available in Hillsborough law will apply to that. So mindful of that, all the public authorities involved at government level, at Home Office level, at police level, will know that they will have to come clean in the inquiry itself. Now, I know the time is short and Paul is going to talk about the nuts and bolts of public inquiries, but just very briefly, public inquiries, statutory inquiries like has been announced happily with Orgreave, they are there for three things. First of all, to set a definitive fact-finding process. Secondly, to determine accountability and what failures there were. And thirdly, to come up with recommendations. The fact that the Orgreave inquiry is statutory is important because it means that the public authorities involved and the officials, they can't get out of cooperating as they've done or tried to do in many non-statutory inquiries, and they can be required to give evidence on oath and make disclosure. So I'm very mindful of the fact that the campaign has done a fantastic job over the years in getting a lot of material out in the open, but there will be a whole lot more. So the first base, of course, for the inquiry will be to ensure, and the campaign and the lawyers to ensure that all of the relevant parties will be required to hand over everything that's relevant. We know that a lot of stuff has been embargoed. That should all go. It should be that the government, the Home Office, the Cabinet Office will be required to go through their files and will hopefully have to disclose all those documents, which we all anticipate will have the fingerprints of Margaret Thatcher and some of her ministers on them in terms of the direction of the political policing at the time. If Hillsborough law is in process, the police and the government departments will be required to provide position statements. That is where they have to set out their perspective of the facts. The importance of position statements is it puts them on the line. They have to decide whether they're going to cover up and risk criminal sanctions or whether they come clean. And the evidence we have from other processes, particularly the UEFA inquiry that Thalia mentioned earlier, is that they are highly effective because generally public officials and commanders, when faced with that dilemma of continuing to cover up where erstwhile they had immunity from any kind of sanction, they now will not have that. And therefore it's a powerful incentive for them to come clean. And so that's the sort of thing that Hillsborough law, if it's in force in time, will bring to the table in terms of Orgreave. So the key things in my view, and they're pretty obvious, and no doubt you've all thought of this already, but is the maximisation of disclosure, is to bring all of the official stakeholders to the table with things like position statements and requirements on them to produce all of the evidence. But it also provides a forum by which those officials and the modern day representatives can be required to give oral evidence, and they can be tested on that. It also provides a forum where those who are at Orgreave who want to should be able to give their account in protected circumstances, not subject to adversarial or brutal cross-examination by police lawyers, but they should be able to give their account and paint the picture of the horror of the day at Orgreave, or the days at Orgreave really was. And I would certainly encourage the campaign to be pushing the bishop, the chair of the inquiry now, on all of those matters, and to say to the Home Office, what exactly are you doing in setting up this inquiry? Are you going to do all of these things? And to hold them to account through that, and to hold them to account through all the things that you're already doing through the media and through the campaigning. So that's as far as I think I'll take it. I'll hand back to you, Thalia.
Thank you, Pete. Over to Chris to tell us about the work of the campaign and to share some of your challenges and experiences thus far. And Chris will lead into Kate, who will also be talking about the campaign's work and where things are following the announcement of the public inquiry.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us here. It's fantastic that you've put this on and that we can hopefully continue to grow support at this crucial time that we've reached. I just want to really give you an idea at the very beginning of the aftermath of what happened at Orgreave and what people involved are left with. One of the miners who was part of that first 15 people trial in 1985 that Marguerite spoke about, was probably one of the most seriously injured, a miner who had his skull fractured. And I just want to read to you something that he told us along the way in our campaign. He said, I've still got the scar from the busted head. I had a truncheon break. I had a fractured skull. I've had to go back to the hospital. I still get headaches and double vision. I have terrible paranoia that they're waiting to get us for something else because we challenged them in court and made them look stupid. I have these thoughts when I go to put the news on that it will start all over again. I've had to ask for psychiatric help. It never goes away. His wife told us that we've tried to get back to normal. It's never gone away. I don't think it ever will. I have a daughter, grown up now, and a few years back she called me and said I needed to come home Rebecca had phoned the doctor because of the state she'd found her dad in. The doctor came and said he's suffering with severe trauma, and that carries on. And I know I have to be strong for him. So this is the reality of what people involved were lived with. Not just the physical injuries, but the psychological damage and trauma. And that miner sat in a meeting with Theresa May and told her about this. And I think it's important to remember, and I'll cover the journey we've been on, but that was listened to and it was ignored. We had to deal with 7 Tory Home Secretaries, 6 because we had Suella Braverman twice, but 7 Tory Home Secretaries refused to give that miner and the many others the accountability that they were asking for. Our campaign was established in 2012. What we want, and it very much falls into that first category, if you like, what Peter's just outlined, but we want, importantly, the official acceptance of what happened. The whole of the policing of the miners' strike was political. Everything was planned to the letter from before the Tories even got into power in 1979. Their approach to trade unions was laid out in the Ridley Plan, which I'm sure if you don't know about, you can Google and have a look at. It lays out very, very clearly what they need to do to stop the control, as they had it, of trade unions. And they wanted to stop the control of trade unions, particularly in nationalised industries where union membership was very high and very, very effective, was because of their economic programme, particularly in the privatisation of what were national industries at the time. And they identified trade unions were in the way, and they identified the one to pick the biggest fight with would be the National Union of Mine Workers. So what we have said is that we want acceptance that that was the case. We want an inquiry to find that Orgreave and the policing of the strike was planned by the government and the police were directed by the state. That this narrative was put forward, was agreed by the government, the police, and then advanced by the media as well, that the police fabricated evidence and presented it at trial. And we want that current false narrative, because in a room like this with these amazing people on this panel, we know that you know the truth. If you speak to miners, they know the truth. But the official record out there is that the miners were the violent ones and that the police were the victims in this. And that simply cannot be the correct recording of our social and political history. So as I said, we were established in 2012. It was very much because of 2 things. Firstly, the findings of the Hillsborough Independent Panel. And secondly, a documentary programme that was on the BBC, which featured Mark George's work on this. And it is such a great tragedy and loss that he is not with us here, because he's been with us so much of this journey. But that programme made it quite clear of the fabrication of evidence as he went line through statements. So the campaign was established, and I'm sure some of you have been involved in campaigning, some of you may not have been involved. It's quite a difficult place and quite slow to get things started, but it built on work that had been done. And quite quickly, with activists getting involved, we were able to at least get a name of a campaign and get some material out there and to start selling t-shirts, which is very important, so that we had money to be able to operate. I've got involved in the campaign because at the time, the law firm I worked with a gentleman called Mike McColgan, which I'm sure Marguerite will remember. Me and Mike worked together in the criminal department. And he said, I've heard there's a campaign being set up in Orgreave. We need to be involved. And that's how we got involved early days. I grew up, as you said in my introduction, in a mining community. I was 14 during the strike and saw all the lies on the media because what we were seeing and talking about at school was not what was being told on the TV and in the newspapers. We quickly, after we got set up and we got off going, South Yorkshire Police decided to refer themselves to what was then the Independent Police Complaints Commission. And that went on until 2015. We made lots of representations to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. We found out about evidence that seemed to be missing. They'd asked police forces to provide all evidence to them. And it transpired that the police operational plan for the 18th of June at Orgreave was missing. And it is still missing. It's never been located. So the plan to get 13, I think it was about 13 different police forces who were there, all organised, all in at a time without mobile phones or internet or emails. The plan would have been extensive, but it is no longer available. We had the findings of the Independent Police Complaints Commission, where they said, yes, there was definitely unlawful violence used, there was definitely wrongdoing at the trial, and that their work could hopefully form the beginning of a piece of work that could lead towards some other kind of inquiry or investigation. And Theresa May put a call out saying, well, if people do want to ask me for an inquiry, ask me. So we did. We worked with a team of us and some of our lawyers who were involved in the trial, and we submitted our first submission, this document, in 2015. We then again had a long wait, and we got a new Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, and we met with her as well. And the miners met with her, and they told her what they told Theresa May. And it took until 2016 for there to be an announcement that no inquiry would happen. Now, before this announcement, there was an article in the Times that said there would be an inquiry into Orgreave. It'd be a single judge inquiry. We didn't know anything about this. It named an unnamed Home Office source. The following day, there was an article from Norman Tebbit and Nigel Lawson saying this can never happen. And then that's indeed what was the case. Amber Rudd said there would be no inquiry. Nobody died. There was no miscarriage of justice. It's a long time ago. And the police have learnt new lessons. It's very different. We continued campaigning. At this point, it wasn't even the Labour Party manifesto. It wasn't their policy for any inquiry to happen into Orgreave. That did finally become policy in 2017 for the first time under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. And also around this time, there was a move by the Bishop of Sheffield, who had moved to take up that role from Liverpool. And he contacted the government saying that there should be some kind of independent panel. And he suggested a Hillsborough-like panel, the HIP panel, suggested that that model might work. And he was refused by, I think it was Sajid Javid at that time, the Home Secretary. So we continued to build. As I said, we got the Labour Party commitment in the elections, which they didn't win in 17 and 19. In 16, 17, we also made some headway with the Home Affairs Select Committee, who at least got from police forces confirmation of what documents they did still hold regarding Orgreave. So we knew there was plenty of information out there, and we were constantly finding information, particularly about the Miss 101 committee. Yes, that is the real name of the secret committee set up by Thatcher, Miscellaneous 101. And we were looking at the information from that. And we also found out that there were documents embargoed. So Association of Chief Police Officer documents, ACPO documents, embargoed until 2066. And also further document, we believe, of the DPP embargoed until 2071. So it is important that everything is disclosed. And of course, the inquiry would have the power to request that. We were approaching the 40th anniversary, and we were extremely frustrated that despite promises from the Labour government, we had not got the commitment to get things rolling on this. So we did produce another report, which is on our website. Please read it. The case for an inquiry. If you go onto the Orgreave Truth and Justice website, and we've set out in that very clearly what an inquiry needs to do, but importantly, this section on public statements versus private acts, where we have laboriously set out what was being said in Parliament and what was being done in secret at the time. So that the inquiry has got a fantastic starting point, is what we would say, in terms of the information and research done already. We just need it to begin. And I'll hand you over to Kate.
Over to you, Kate.
Right, thank you. Thanks everybody for inviting us. I just wanted to start by saying it was an honour for me to be involved in the in supporting the miners' strike. Through my activism and through Women Against Pit Closures in Sheffield, and the strong bonds and the solidarity involved between all of us, there was nothing like it, and you had to experience that to understand it. But we still talk about it a lot since, you know, we built some fantastic friendships and relationships, and we learned a hell of a lot from that strike. So as we know, this is an injustice that's been going on now for over 41 years. 41 years. And the government and police, as you know, have never been held to account. What the Tories did and what the police did, instead they've lied, they've covered it up. And that's all been aided and abetted by the media, as we know. And that false narrative still continues. We read reports regularly written by journalists who just look up things on Google and God knows what else and repeat the false narrative about what happened. They always get the facts wrong. But what we do know is that after Orgreave, and indeed after the trial and after the miners' strike, there were many MPs who were heavily involved in trying to get an Orgreave inquiry, and they were working extremely closely with the National Union of Mine Workers. I was based in Sheffield during the strike, and the headquarters of the NUM was in Sheffield. The Sheffield Trades Council was one of the leading trades councils in Britain, who was doing phenomenal work with the NUM and with the trade union movement. Indeed, my mum, who was president of Sheffield Trades Council, was organising, getting people to Orgreave. She did a massive amount of organising, getting people organising Sheffield, collecting money and food, as did many other people. The activity was utterly phenomenal, and Sheffield Women Against Pit Closures were utterly fantastic. I learned a lot from a lot of those women. So just to give a bit of context, really, the large-scale pit closure programme, organised by the 1980s Thatcher government, along with privatisation and attacks on trade unions, pensions and the welfare state, has left a terribly long-lasting legacy of over 41 years. And we really see inequality, poverty and destitution, particularly in our areas, in the areas that we live in. You know, people need to come and see what is going on in Sheffield and throughout various cities throughout Britain, not just in the north, throughout Britain. But policing practices in many industrial disputes before and since the miners' strike have been pre-planned. They've been pre-planned and they've been violent. And the policing at Orgreave needs to also be seen in that context. We've seen how the police behaved and political policing throughout the steel strike, you know, the terrible damage that they did to striking steelworkers in Sheffield. It was horrendous. And what they were doing at Grunwick in the 70s under a Labour government. What's happening now in this country, a lot of it is not new, and it was happening under successive Labour governments. And I just want to alert you to the book Charged. It's a book that we've used rather a lot to illustrate what was going on before the miners' strike and since. And although there's been lots of parallels with Hillsborough, there are a lot of differences as well, and we also try and talk about the other political industrial disputes where the police were turning up en masse at places like Wapping and Warrington and kicking the hell out of people, all pre-planned. I'd also like to alert you to another recent report, Still Digging Deeper, which talks about the terrible inequalities and destitution that people are living with still since the miners' strike, and because of the miners' strike, because of what that Tory government did to Britain, and is still happening now with all the various austerity policies that have never really stopped. It's caused terrible harm. People in coalfields communities have a lower than average life expectancy, widespread poor health, cuts to benefits, and cuts to what are now basic services. You know, the services have been cut and cut and cut. And as Chris has already mentioned, our attempts to get the government to hold an inquiry were turned down several times by all the Tory Home Secretaries since 2016. I'm amazed, Chris, that you can remember how many there were. I think I've lost count. And as Chris also outlined, Amber Rudd in her announcement to Parliament stated there would be no inquiry for the reasons that Chris mentioned. And we've been ignored. We've been treated disgracefully by all these Tory Home Secretaries. But as Chris mentioned, the Bishop of Sheffield, Pete Wilcox, tried to get the Tory government in 2019 to set up a Hillsborough-style inquiry panel. Sajid Javid didn't even meet him, wouldn't even meet with him, but instead allocated a civil servant to meet with a bishop because he wasn't prepared to meet with him. So as you can imagine, we were delighted, cautiously optimistic, I think is the expression, when after many years of campaigning and much lobbying and support from a number of MPs, many of them Labour MPs, that we finally had a commitment in the 2017 Labour Party manifesto. We worked very closely with a lot of MPs. We worked very closely to try and make that happen. And I think because of our campaign, that did happen. And I think we'd like to be very clear about that. This campaign has moved some mountains, and a lot of the miners involved are incredibly proud of the role that they've played in ensuring that that's happened. And we've been consistently holding events all over Britain. We're constantly speaking at meetings. We get at least 1 or 2 invitations a week. And even though there aren't that many of us, we still go and speak to people. And of course, people are getting older and that's getting more difficult, which is why we do a lot of the things online when we'd really like to be there with the drinks and the canapes. So on the 18th of June, the report that Chris has highlighted, not only did we do a big press release, splash, media release, you name it, we did it, but we actually physically went down to London, bearing in mind that was during an election campaign, and hand delivered this report, and I really would urge you to read it. We've delivered it to many politicians as well as the leaders of the political parties. So when the statutory inquiry was announced by the Home Secretary in July of this year, we were aware what a historic and momentous announcement that really was, and we were very proud of the role that we'd played to make that happen. The miners, the families and communities had waited a hell of a long time for this. And it was a real step forward for the truth about what the Tory government was directing, the violence of the police, and that would hopefully be acknowledged and exposed. We had produced a leaflet well before we produced the document, and this is also on our website. And this explains quite clearly what we expect an inquiry to do. You know, how essential it is due to the incredibly serious and unprecedented nature of what happened at Orgreave, the militarised nature of police tactics on the 18th of June 1984 and other occasions as well, the deliberate construction of the false narrative in police evidence, the deliberate promotion of that false narrative by the media, the lack of legal accountability and failure of the legal system, and the ongoing consequences of Orgreave and the strike, and the role of undercover policing and policing legislation, and new sources of police and government evidence. The key issues associated with Orgreave still being incredibly relevant today, and it being in the public interest for there to be an inquiry. And we've long stated all this since the campaign started. We have had we've said that it needs to have integrity and inspire confidence, trust and respect, and it must have the power to require all the relevant information and evidence to be produced to it. Ensure those who have an interest in the inquiry are able to fully participate in order to lend their experience, knowledge and understanding to the process. Be accessible and inclusive to allow people to provide oral contributions to the evidence gathering process. A lot of the things that have already been said by other speakers. Be transparent, open and accessible, and its conclusions publicly explained in an authoritative way. And we've made it clear over many years to the Home Office that the Hillsborough independent panel model was a useful guide to help to establish an Orgreave inquiry, and that the inquiry planning is equipped with an appreciation of some of these basic elements. We've met with the Bishop of Sheffield, we've met with him several times, and we have met with him relatively recently, but we've not met with the Home Office since the inquiry was announced, despite our efforts, and we have made a lot of effort to try and get in touch with speaking to the Home Office and the Home Secretaries. So whatever's going on behind the scenes, and we hope it is something, we're also hoping that we hear something very soon. But we've made it clear that it's essential that the candidates for the panel should involve individuals who are experienced in the work of upholding legal, constitutional and civil liberties, and compromise a commitment both personally and through their work to the analysis, progression and practical protection of such concepts of fundamental and constitutional rights. We don't just want people who read documents and ask people questions. They need to have a clear understanding of what this is all about. Expertise in the complex interaction of the judiciary, the media and government is also incredibly important in this inquiry, as is, and we've said this very clearly, trade union, industrial relations and medical expertise. We've said this repeatedly. The whole experience of the miners' strike is exemplified in the events of the 18th of June 84, and was the destruction of protected rights. The panel individuals need to command confidence and respect for their presumed knowledge of and experience in what is fundamental to the inquiry's investigation. Furthermore, those conducting and administering it, we don't just want pen pushers, also need to be able to convey that they have a clear understanding of the less tangible experience and the necessary wisdom to support such an important inquiry. We're dealing with people, we're dealing with emotions. this has to be conducted very carefully.
And of course, Kate, it has to also be, it's urgent because, you know.
Can I just finish, please?
Sure, so much time.
The statute requires the Home Secretary to consult with the inquiry chair, as you probably know, and as you know, that person is Pete Wilcox, the Bishop of Sheffield, about the panel membership. But it is ultimately at the discretion of the Home Secretary, and this is why we want to meet with the Home Secretary. We sincerely hope the Home Office takes notice of what we're saying and in selecting the panel members for this inquiry, consults experts in all these areas. We're fully aware of the damning documents and other evidence that is in the public domain already, and of the documents that are currently embargoed, and some of the documents that the police have already destroyed. We've been told that some of those destroyed papers and evidence are replicated, so you know there will be information that they think they might have got rid of. And we also know that the many lived experiences of the miners and the families and supporters is the evidence and where the truth lies. The inquiry must be able to follow that evidence. We understand there'll be a public announcement about all this starting in the next few weeks. We don't know when. At some stage, we'll be asking anyone wishing to provide written or oral evidence to register their interest to do so. We will be strongly encouraging people to do this and encouraging the inquiry team and process for gathering information to be as inclusive and as far-reaching as possible. And we need to make sure that the inquiry is driven by the people who have the full weight of the state against them and who were directly involved. We need people to come forward to the inquiry to make sure this is an honest and thorough inquiry that gets to the truth and gives them all the justice that they deserve. Thanks for asking us.
Thank you so much, Kate. The point I wanted to make, as you spoke about the need to hear from people, is the delay. And, you know, we know that people are getting older. Some people have sadly passed. And so it's been urgent for 40 years, and it continues to be even more urgent. And we salute the work of the campaign, and certainly you both for pressing ahead and for updating all online and those of us here with the work of the campaign. Paul, I'm going to ask you to give us some nuts and bolts in 5 minutes.
5 minutes, no problem.
But I want you to focus on terms of reference.
So, I mean, first of all, thanks to Garden Call for putting this on. I don't normally speak as quickly as this, so you're going to have to keep up with me and keep pace going. Just the opening remarks. I've been asked to speak because I've been instructed on a couple of public inquiries, including the Undercover Policing Inquiry, which is about political policing itself, campaigns and spying on campaigns. The other one is the COVID inquiry, because I represented small trade unions of workers who were outsourced and treated very poorly, badly by management, NHS, etc. during the course of the COVID inquiry. Public inquiries, as we already know, are set up by government, and that's the first. It's great it's set up, but obviously that's the first warning sign. It's set up and funded by government and actually kind of directed at government. I think some of the speakers absolutely have made the point that the warning signs are there on a number of things. And the 2 or 3 warning signs which I could recommend from my experience in the Undercover Policing Inquiry is, the first one is panel members. You need panel members. You've got a great chair in the Orgreave inquiry, but we need good panel members. I'm conscious that particularly our colleagues on screen made that point. It's something that the campaign really needs to press home on the Home Office. And if I was ever involved in a public inquiry in the future, whether it's this one or any other one, a decent chair and panel members is an absolute must. I think the other warning sign for any public inquiry, and for those who have not been involved in public inquiries, the Secretary of State, alongside the Chair, but usually the Secretary of State, sets the terms of reference. And that has to be a campaigning point, because he or she cannot set the terms of reference alone. There has to be fundamentally engaged with potential core participants or campaigners who've brought or demanded the public inquiry. The terms of reference has to be both determined by campaigners, it's got to be determined in terms of what you want to get out of the inquiry, and it's absolutely essential because it is the inquiry's roadmap. The terms of reference are the inquiry's roadmap. It's what can be investigated, potentially what could be excluded, and sure, nothing's excluded, of course, the time frame of the events and the scope of the inquiry itself. And it's an absolute battleground, because if it's too narrow, the truth is going to be suffocated, and if it's too broad, the inquiry can become unwieldy. Wherein I'm involved in an inquiry now, which is 10 years in the making. I started it as a boy, brown hair, and look at me now after 10 years of the inquiry. It's absolutely crucial that the terms of reference are a battleground that needs to be won. And I think the one lesson I would have learned through, if I'd known at the start of the undercover policing inquiry, is the importance of lobbying, campaigning, demanding, drawing up, if necessary, your own terms of reference, getting as many campaigners, trade unions, core participants, whoever, to sign your terms of reference and demand that they are made as the terms of reference of the inquiry itself. I'm on 3 minutes and 40 seconds, so I'm just going to get another 1 minute and 20 seconds out of this, my 5 minutes of fame. The other thing which I think the speakers have touched on is public hearings. Absolutely essential. That sounds crazy in a public inquiry. What, public hearings? The undercover policing inquiry has had more hearings behind closed doors than it has had open hearings, therefore becoming almost the undercover public inquiry itself. And that's one of the things that is absolutely essential in demanding from the Home Secretary, demanding from the powers that be, that there has to be open, absolutely open hearings. And the final point I'd make in my last 30 seconds, look at the preparation I've made as well, but my last 30 seconds is the issue of the evidence and disclosure. Everyone's pointed that out. It's absolutely essential that there is no hidden evidence. There is facilities for evidence to be redacted. There are facilities for it not to be disclosed publicly and all the rest of it. Whatever happens in a public inquiry, core participants, campaigners, trade unionists, those involved have to demand that all hearings are public, unless a core participant actually a non-state core participant needs it behind closed doors. But all public officials, all public hearings need to be public, and as much as, well, all the disclosure without exception, or if it has to be kept under closed doors with discussions with core participants, but everything has to be in the public body. There needs to be no delays, there needs to be control by core participants, particularly in the terms of reference. And I have to, finally, with my 2 seconds, I've gone 30 seconds over, I have to applaud the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign for their amazing campaign, their absolute tenacity and pulling together the solidarity they have to pull off the public inquiry. Absolutely salute them, and I hope it's an open, transparent inquiry, and it keeps and makes the powerful truly accountable, whether that's the South Yorkshire Police, the ministers involved in the Tory government, and ultimately Margaret Thatcher herself. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you so much. We are running over time. I mean, we started late, but I just wanted to give members of the audience any opportunity to ask any of the speakers any questions before we round up. Nothing from the floor.
Everyone's worn out.
I just wonder, are we looking for another 40 years? How many more inquiries and needs for them will there be? Because this, I remember all this. I'm from the north. I'm from,
Yes.
People affected by this where I'm from. And it just seems that, as you say, all these inquiries we have, all this cover-up, all this corruption, it never ends. It just goes on and on and on.
I think
just to pick up on that, I mean, that, for me, the Hillsborough law should go a long way to bring public officials and public authorities to account. And, you know, with the duty of candor being put into statute, that should be a starting point, certainly, for those who are affected, victims, and those individuals who need to hold the public authorities and public bodies to account, to take steps, or, you know, that should pave the way for that. Pete, I don't know if you wanted to come in. It is, remind me of your name?
I'm Deb from Jengba.
Deb from Jengba. You can't see her, but she is sitting in the.
Big fan of Jemba, so and great question. Yeah, just very briefly, I mean, I'm a bit biased because I've been one of the people who've been promoting Hillsborough law and arguing with the government over the last year after 10 years of campaigning for it. And is it a panacea? Is it a silver bullet? No. The obfuscation and cover-ups have been a feature of our public life forever. Some of the campaigns that are supporting Hillsborough law go back from before I was born. Which is, believe me, a long time ago. But it is a major start. Let me just finish the answer to the question with one thing. When we're around the table with ministers and officials from the Cabinet Office and the Home Office and Ministry of Justice, and when MI5 and MI6 have made it very clear that they're implacably against Hillsborough law, it gives me a lot of confidence that we're on the right track, because there is so much opposition to it from behind the scenes vested interests, that it is a bit scary whether we'll get it over the line, but we're very close to it now. But the fact they are terrified of it suggests to me that it will make a difference.
And I think that also feeds into the answer to a question we have on the Q&A chat, and it's really in relation to the child sexual exploitation inquiry. You know, how do you avoid making the same mistakes of Hillsborough and Orgreave, cover-ups, that sort of, you know, obfuscation and peddling the lie? And you know, we've spoken about the false narrative of Orgreave still running now. And as we saw in Hillsborough, you know, it's taken the inquests to undo the narratives about whether the fans were to blame. And so a public inquiry, bringing all the facts to light, but also, you know, Hillsborough law bringing state bodies to full account. And I think that would also feed into that question that we got in the Q&A. Margaret, your hand is up.
Yeah, I hope, can you hear me?
We can, loud and clear.
Okay. One of the things I wanted to say was that, and I'd forgotten about it when I was speaking, is that prior to Orgreave, many things had happened, actions by the government, for example, stopping cars going up the M1 to picket, stopping cars and questioning people in cars as to where they were going. There was a whole campaign that by the government to try and keep picketing and actions at pits, not just Orgreave, but all over the country, to a limit. And one of the questions that should be raised at the Orgreave inquiry was, you know, where did this national plan, because it was a national plan, come from? It obviously came from a Tory Home Office, but who decided that nationwide that they should stop cars and question people? I didn't get stopped on the M1 because I was a sole woman in a car, but I know guys who were going up, also other lawyers who were going up, who were stopped and asked where they're going, because they were potential picketers. And somewhere the police had got car numbers, I think, of potential people that they did want to stop. And that should form part of the inquiry, because there was a whole background before Orgreave of state interference with public protest and public right to picket. And that should be part of the inquiry. It's very important.
Thanks. Yes, Gloria.
Sorry,
Gloria from Jengbao.
I'm curious whether Pete might be able to answer this, whether you could call it conspiracy theory, or but one of the reasons Jengbau's been supporting Orgreave and is your solidarity and your amazing campaigning, which we hope we can mirror, is that the day the Supreme Court decided on R versus Jogi, so we've been campaigning, we got to the Supreme Court. At 10:30 we came out and there was the bank of cameras and everyone taking photographs, and we thought, yeah, we've won it because the law had taken a wrong turn in 1984, which is so interesting because that's Orgreave. 12 o'clock that day was when Amber Rudd announced that there was not going to be an Orgreave inquiry. Now, was that orchestrated? Which wiped us off the news. It meant that, you know, rightly so, everything was about the Orgreave inquiry being cancelled. But is that level of kind of complicity, and does that happen, or is it just conspiracy? That question.
For me, I have absolutely no doubt it's orchestrated. None whatsoever. You know, the Home Office were incredibly concerned at the time of Orgreave about the pickets that were taking place all over the country. And they wanted to stop people basically traveling, going to places where there were likely to be pickets. And that was a national plan. That wasn't just Yorkshire Police or something like that. That was a national plan to stop supporters traveling to picket at various mines.
Why did Amber Rudd, what was the justification for stopping the inquiry at that point? Was there any? On I think, what was the date, Joan? The 31st of October, was it? No, it's in February, 16th. Yeah.
It was the 31st of October. We remember it because it was obviously Halloween.
Yeah.
Nothing so scary as a Tory Home Secretary.
It was definitely a trick, not a treat.
Yeah. We've got loads of these, by the way, so
we use these all the time. But there were a lot of toing and froing that day. A lot of media contacting us about things that they knew about that we didn't know about the announcement that was going to be made in Parliament. We were there, and we'd been waiting for that announcement for some considerable time. You know, some of us were camping out in London under very difficult circumstances. And we were trying to do things in the House of Parliament. A few MPs were trying to help us out in quickly sort of drafting press releases about what might happen next. You know, they'd really got us deliberately on the back foot, and it was deliberate. I think Marguerite's absolutely right. It wasn't. There's no conspiracy. I don't believe in conspiracy theories. That's something that's been that we get called because we're exposing the truth. And you know, they did terrible things during that strike, and they've been doing terrible things ever since and before. So I think it was a really good question from Jengbau, though, and thanks for asking it.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists and our speakers and everyone online, and for those who have come into Chambers in person. It's been a real privilege to chair this event and to have spoken with and interacted with, in particular, Kate and Chris over the last couple of weeks, and to dive deeper into the challenges that the campaign faces. And we hope that from today's discussion, we will increase awareness to about your work, and for there to be greater promotion of the campaign amongst those who are here, those who are online. I've put the link in the chat, so that together we can work towards the public inquiry that you seek, and for there to be real truth, justice, and accountability. And changing in policing in Britain. And of course, we also carry on the campaign for Hillsborough law, because as Pete has pointed out, the real issue is getting it implemented and passed in the way that it needs to be for full accountability and candor. And not a watering down Hillsborough law, but the Hillsborough law that the families have campaigns for. So that is a campaign that we must all work together on, as well as Orgreave. So thank you online. Thanks so much to our speakers. Margaret, you've joined us from Canada. Thank you. And hopefully we carry on the solidarity and the work together. Thank you.